This is my story of my journey with music. I thought this was going to be a quick little talk, and then I started writing it out, and I actually felt like I was in therapy. For real. To make a long story short, I got a long story with music. So where does it all begin? My story begins in the mountains of Tennessee. I joke with my wife now because I actually was able to bring her back there to Mountain City, Tennessee. I was literally raised on a mountaintop in Tennessee. And another early memory is of my parents. My parents were mountaintop gospel singing superstars. I really didn't even realize how popular they were until I was a grown man and went back to Mountain City and heard people talk about my parents and just in awe at the influence they had over people with their music ministry that they had. So my father would play the piano and sing. My sister would sing background vocals. My mother, you would call her, I guess, the lead singer of the family. And I would just be up on stage acting foolish. I remember I had a Mr. T starter set. So I had, a few Mr. T rings and, plastic, of course, and some chains. And my parents would be singing and my sister would be singing. And I was walking around on a stage looking at people in the audience, telling them I pity the fool because that's what I was into at the time. But I guess you can say that I sort of grew up on the stage as we went from church to church, singing, "It's gonna rain, it's gonna rain, it's gonna rain, you better get ready and bear this in mind." They went all over the mountaintop singing that song, and that's what my parents were known for. The next big part of my life was just as a consumer of music, and let me just say this. There is nothing negative about that. And one thing I've realized about writing that is there is nothing wrong with consuming and loving music. That is probably when I had the healthiest relationship with music, was just when I appreciated it. And at that time in my life, there was no one you could appreciate more than Michael Jackson. Oh yeah. I was a huge Michael Jackson fan, as was everyone at that time. My sister said she was going to marry him. I'm like, "You going to marry Michael Jackson?" She said, "When I get going, I'm going to marry Michael Jackson." I said, "Even if he's in a wheelchair?" She's like, "Even if he's in a wheelchair, I love Michael Jackson." And that's how everyone I knew felt about Michael Jackson. Of course, I remember one Christmas I got the Michael Jackson jacket. Oh man, one of my favorite times. One of my favorite jackets. I just loved Michael Jackson's music. Could not get enough of it. And it really influenced me for the rest of my life. One of the biggest influences with music was my mother. Oh my goodness. My mother had a passion for music, and I guess that's where I got it from. One thing that really sticks out to me is this infatuation she had with Rick James. I just didn't get it as a young boy. I remember looking at the 8-track tape, and I remember looking at those tight pants, those thigh-high boots, and the braids, and just confused about what my mother saw in him. But I tell you what, she still loved some Rick James. But my mom listened to a wide variety of music, and that's something that she passed on to me as well. She liked country music, and during that time, one of her favorite singers was Randy Travis. So, of course, because it was one of her favorites, he became one of mine. And one song that she loved is "I'm Gonna Love You Forever." That song I still remember because she played it over and over and over again. And I think something that I pulled from that too was a love for lyrics. I see how my mom responded to lyrics of certain songs. And especially even after I'm grown now, just seeing how that was probably filling that romantic void in her life. Later on, something that she became infatuated with was Babyface. And I just realized, what woman would not love to hear those words that Babyface would sing? I'll pay your rent. I'll buy your clothes. I'll cook your dinner too. Hold on, he ain't done yet. As soon as I get home from work, my mom loved it. And she loved every word of those Babyface songs, I think, because that's something that she was yearning to hear. One big moment, and I can't even call this a record. It was a moment in my life that was just huge, was when Luther Vandross's Never Too Much came out. It seemed to change the whole vibe of the place that we were. We were staying with my aunt at the time. And I just remember my mom and my aunt just spending a lot of time together. And whenever they would come together, that record was being played. When the house was being cleaned, that record was being played. When they were hanging out, that record was being played. When they were getting ready to go out, that record was being played. And it just seemed to have such an upbeat quality about it that it just made that moment in my life just such a happy moment. Never Too Much by Luther Vandross. In 1989, my family moved to Georgia and my whole music scene changed. When we were in Tennessee, I would say pop music sort of was prevalent. It was the number one thing that was being played on the radio and that we were listening to at the time. But when we moved to Georgia and when we came into the metro Atlanta area, oh man, my relationship with music changed again. And actually, I saw something that changed the way that I would look at artists, and that was Jodeci. Jodeci was the first group that I could really relate to, I think. Back in my Michael Jackson days, I think he was someone I looked up to, I admired, I wanted to be like. But Jodeci was like a group I didn't have to try to be like. We were very similar already. I admired the clothes they wore, and it would be something that I would just wear on a regular day. They were just artists that were naturally relatable for me. And to top that off, they had one of the greatest singers of all time. Have one of the greatest singers of all time, and that is Casey Haley. Man, he just really changed the way that I looked at artists singing. I loved the roughness of his voice. I loved that raspy feel he had to it. The power that he had when he sang. Every Tuesday, do you remember those days when CDs came out on Tuesdays? I was one of those people who would be at the record store every Tuesday until I eventually started working at the record store. So whenever anything Jodeci would come out, I would be at that record store every Tuesday. And I remember, if you remember those days, they would push albums back. So you would show up that Tuesday ready to buy your album. They'd be like, oh, it's been pushed back another week. You'd have to wait another week. That was life for me every time Jodeci released something. And then they released something that would change my life forever. They had a song called Freaking You. During those days, it was common for when an artist, especially an R&B artist, had a hit song, they would make remixes, and you would get the single, and on the single would be the B-side of the remix, and a lot of times the remix would be bigger than the original song. But Jodeci released this maxi single of Freaking You. On this maxi single, they had different versions of Freaking You, and basically they were just taking things in and out of the mix. And when I heard that maxi single, that is when I finally understood how songs were produced. I remember there was one, it was called the, what do they call it? The acoustimental or something like that. But they took all the other instruments out except for like the drums and the acoustic guitar and the vocals. Then they had one that was like a beat acapella, just a drum beat and the vocals. And by listening to this, I could understand how songs were put together. It was like my eyes were open. Oh, okay, so here's how we put a song together. We put down a drum track, we put down a bass line, we put down some keyboards, we put down some acoustic guitar, and then we layer the vocals on top of that. In my mind, it all started making sense. And that is when music changed for me in a huge way, because I no longer just wanted to listen to and appreciate music. I wanted to produce it myself.